The federal courthouse located at 601 Market Street in Philadelphia was 3 blocks from the Chevron station where Judge Reuben Pierce paused to replenish his automobile's fuel on the morning of October the 16th, 2024. He was already running 15 minutes behind for an emergency proceeding concerning a case involving the excessive use of force by law enforcement. However, Officer Michael Stone was unaware of the courthouse's proximity, the scheduled proceeding, or the irony of his impending actions. Upon observing a man of color in a dark robe adjacent to an expensive vehicle, he concluded he had apprehended the perpetrator of the luxury vehicle theft that the department had been pursuing since an overnight report. Stone's 8 years of targeting individuals of color in expensive automobiles had ingrained in him a reliance on his presumptions over verifiable evidence. Consequently, when the individual identified himself as a federal judge, Stone interpreted it as the fabrication of a criminal rather than the straightforward truth that a single telephone call or a cursory examination of the federal court's website could have substantiated. He detained the judge, conducted a search of his vehicle, and construed the judge's urgent explanations about needing to reach the courthouse as indicators of guilt rather than the legitimate exigency of someone whose courtroom awaited. What he failed to recognize was that the briefcase he was examining contained legal documents pertinent to the very proceeding that would commence in his absence. That the attire he was ridiculing constituted official judicial dress universally acknowledged in every courtroom across America, and that within 20 minutes a junior attorney involved in the delayed proceeding would arrive at the same refueling station and recognize the judge being taken into custody. This initiated a sequence of events culminating in Stone facing criminal accusations for the unlawful apprehension of a federal judge based solely on overt racial prejudice to such an extent that even his own department could offer no defense. Before proceeding further, from what city or country are you observing this broadcast? Please share your location in the comments. We are eager to learn where our viewers are tuning in from. If you believe that judicial robes warrant acknowledgement rather than suspicion, kindly press the like and subscribe buttons here on JPTV. Judge Reuben Pierce departed his residence in the Chestnut Hill neighborhood of Philadelphia at 7:42 a.m., already trailing behind schedule for a hearing that was slated to begin at 8:30 a.m. in his chambers at the James A. Byrne U.S. Courthouse on Market Street. He was 54 years of age, a federal judge for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, with 22 years of service on the bench. He had been appointed by a Democratic president, confirmed by a bipartisan Senate vote, and had cultivated a reputation as a judicious, equitable jurist whose verdicts were infrequently overturned on appeal. The morning's hearing was of particular significance due to its involvement in a civil rights lawsuit filed against the Philadelphia Police Department, alleging the use of excessive force during an apprehension that resulted in a man sustaining permanent injuries. The case had attracted considerable media interest, and the courtroom was anticipated to be thronged with legal counsel, plaintiffs, defendants, and observers awaiting Judge Pierce's determinations on several crucial motions that could dictate whether the case proceeded to trial. Judge Pierce had intended to arrive at the courthouse by 8 a.m. to conduct a final review of his notes. However, his morning had been interrupted by a call from his elderly mother concerning a medical appointment she required assistance in scheduling, and their conversation had extended beyond the expected duration. By the time he had donned his judicial robes at home to conserve time upon reaching the courthouse, he was running late. He was operating his charcoal gray 2022 Mercedes-Benz S-Class, a vehicle he had acquired 2 years prior after his previous automobile had ultimately ceased functioning after 15 years of service. The Mercedes, while costly, was not ostentatious. It was the kind of vehicle that signified professional accomplishment without being ostentatious. It was registered in his name, appropriately insured, and had never been involved in any incidents beyond a minor collision in a parking lot 3 years prior, for which he was entirely responsible. As he navigated Germantown Avenue towards Center City, the fuel indicator illuminated. He had intended to refuel the previous evening, but had forgotten, and he now faced the prospect of approximately 20 miles of remaining range. The courthouse was 8 miles away, which should have been adequate, but Pierce preferred not to operate so close to the limit. He observed the Chevron station at 1847 Market Street, a mere 3 blocks from the courthouse, and entered the premises at 8:03 a.m. He was wearing his complete judicial robes, having put them on at his residence with the intention of proceeding directly into the courthouse and assuming the bench without delay. The dark robe was formal and unmistakable, characteristic of those worn by federal judges nationwide, with his name subtly embroidered on the interior collar. He exited his vehicle, inserted his credit card into the fuel dispenser, and commenced filling his tank while simultaneously checking his mobile device for messages from his law clerk, Angela Morrison, regarding the arrival status of the legal representatives. Unbeknownst to Pierce, at 2:17 a.m. that morning, a luxury sedan had been purloined from a Mercedes dealership in North Philadelphia. The report disseminated to patrol officers described it as a dark-hued luxury sedan, potentially a Mercedes or BMW, stolen from the dealership lot, with the perpetrator's identity unknown. The description lacked specificity due to the theft being discovered upon the dealership's opening and security footage still undergoing review. Officer Michael Stone had been on patrol since 6 a.m., working the day shift for the Philadelphia Police Department's Central Division. He was 37 years old, a veteran of 8 years who had primarily served in patrol capacities across Center City and adjacent districts. His personnel file indicated he was an active officer involved in regular stops and apprehensions. However, it also contained 9 complaints over an 8-year period alleging racial profiling and harassment of individuals of color operating luxury vehicles. The complaints consistently detailed a pattern. Stone would halt black drivers of luxury cars for minor infractions or without any apparent violation, subsequently subjecting them to extended questioning regarding vehicle ownership, employment, and their means of affording their vehicles. He would initiate vehicle searches based on vague assertions of suspicious conduct and had faced accusations on multiple occasions of presuming that any person of color in an expensive vehicle must have either stolen it or acquired it through illicit means. All 9 complaints underwent internal investigation and were dismissed, with findings that Stone had acted within departmental guidelines and officer discretion. Upon receiving the stolen Mercedes report via radio at 7:15 a.m., Stone resolved to actively seek out the vehicle. His interpretation of this objective involved scrutinizing every luxury car driven by an individual of color he encountered. He had already conducted 2 such stops that morning: a BMW operated by a black businessman en route to his workplace, and a Lexus driven by a black woman transporting her children to school. Both stops concluded without any infractions being identified, and irritated citizens filed complaints that, like all prior ones, were eventually dismissed. At 8:05 a.m., Stone entered the Chevron station on Market Street to procure coffee before concluding his shift. It was at this juncture that he observed Pierce standing beside the fuel pump, attired in his judicial robes, next to a dark, gray Mercedes S-Class. In Stone's perception, this image did not align with conventional expectations. He perceived a man of color in what appeared to be a lengthy black robe or costume, positioned beside an expensive vehicle that generally matched the description of the stolen automobile. His 8 years of engaging in racial profiling led him to conclude he had stumbled upon something suspicious. He did not perceive a federal judge in official judicial attire. He did not consider the possibility that a gas station located 3 blocks from a federal courthouse might logically serve judges as patrons. He did not contemplate the fact that an individual who had stolen a vehicle would likely refrain from stopping to refuel it using a credit card. His inherent bias processed the scene as black individual, expensive car, unusual attire, presumably a disguise, likely a car thief attempting to appear legitimate. Stone disembarked from his patrol car and approached Pierce, his hand resting on his sidearm. Pierce noted the officer's approach and assumed it to be a cordial interaction, perhaps the officer recognizing him from court or simply being friendly. "Good morning, officer," Pierce stated, glancing at his wristwatch and noting it was now 8:07 a.m. He had 23 minutes to complete refueling, navigate 3 blocks, park, and reach his courtroom. Sir, I need to see your driver's license and vehicle registration. To whom does this automobile belong? Pierce looked up, taken aback by the officer's imperative tone. It is my vehicle. Is there a problem? License and registration. Immediately. Pierce felt a familiar tension coalesce in his chest, having been a black man in America for 54 years, and he recognized the subtle shift in an officer's demeanor that signaled an impending, difficult, and protracted encounter. Officer, I am running late for my professional obligations. Could you please inform me of the reason for this inquiry? I am investigating a report of a stolen vehicle. I need to confirm that this car is registered to you. It is indeed registered to me. I am Judge Reuben Pierce, presiding over the Federal District Court. My courthouse is located 3 blocks from here, and I have a judicial proceeding scheduled to commence in 20 minutes. Stone's gaze fell upon Pierce's robes, and his expression conveyed palpable incredulity. You are a judge? Dressed in that fashion? Yes. These are judicial robes. I am a federal judge, and I am tardy for court. Indeed. And I, the President. License and registration. This is my final polite request. Pierce proceeded to his vehicle and retrieved his wallet and registration documents. His hands remained steady despite his escalating frustration and apprehension concerning the time constraint. He presented both documents to Stone, which clearly bore his name, his residential address in Chestnut Hill, and the fact that the Mercedes was registered to Reuben L. Pierce at that same address. Stone examined the documents with evident skepticism. How long have you possessed this vehicle? 2 years. Officer, I implore you. I genuinely need to reach the courthouse. You are welcome to telephone and verify my identity if you harbor doubts. Many individuals fabricate narratives when detained. What is the purpose of this attire? This is not an elaborate costume. It is a judicial robe. I am a federal judge. This is the standard attire within our courtrooms. Stone's radio emitted the crackle of routine traffic updates while Pierce checked his phone, discovering a text message from Angela. Judge, the attorneys have all arrived. Are you nearby? It was 8:11 a.m., 19 minutes before his scheduled proceeding, and he found himself at a refueling station being interrogated by an officer who mistook his judicial robes for a Halloween costume. I will require you to step away from the vehicle while I ascertain this information, Stone stated, already convinced he had uncovered illicit activity and determined to pursue the matter until its resolution. Judge Reuben Pierce, who had dedicated 22 years to presiding over cases within the federal courtroom located just 3 blocks away, who had adjudicated criminal sentences and upheld constitutional rights, and who had garnered the respect of legal practitioners throughout the Eastern District, perceived with a dawning certainty that his judicial authority held no sway with an officer who had already prejudged a black individual in robes beside a Mercedes as a vehicle thief in disguise. Stone returned to his patrol car with Pierce's identification and registration, while Pierce remained by the fuel pump, observing the minutes on his phone advance from 8:12 to 8:15, then to 8:18. His courtroom was a mere 3 blocks distant, and his proceeding was scheduled to commence in 12 minutes. He could discern the federal courthouse from his vantage point, could observe the flags fluttering above the edifice where his nameplate adorned a courtroom door, and where his law clerk was likely experiencing increasing anxiety regarding his absence. Stone ran Pierce's details through the system, and all information returned as clear. Valid driver's license, no outstanding warrants, no infractions, vehicle registered to the name on the license. The Mercedes vehicle identification number did not correspond with any stolen vehicle reports. Every aspect was legitimate and lawful, precisely as Pierce had articulated. However, Stone's 8 years of prioritizing his own prejudices over factual evidence remained firmly entrenched, and he was disinclined to allow clear records to alter his conviction regarding what he believed he had discovered. He exited his patrol car and approached Pierce once more at 8:21, 9 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to commence. Sir, I must conduct a search of your vehicle. Pierce felt his composure begin to fray. On what grounds? You have processed my information. Everything returned as clear. I've informed you that I am a federal judge and I am late for court. Please permit me to depart. Your narrative lacks coherence. No one dresses in this fashion for work. I suspect you have stolen this vehicle and are employing a costume to deceive individuals. This is not a costume. I am a federal judge. Please contact the courthouse and verify. The telephone number is publicly accessible. Simply call and inquire for Judge Pierce's chambers. Stone's countenance hardened as he resented being dictated to, particularly by someone he had already classified as deceptive. Step away from the vehicle. I am performing a search. I do not consent to a search. You lack any probable cause. Your suspicious demeanor and refusal to cooperate provide me with all the probable cause I require. Pierce's mobile device vibrated with another text from Angela. Judge, it is 8:22. Shall I inform the attorneys that you are delayed? He attempted to respond, but Stone seized his phone. Refrain from touching your phone during an interaction with law enforcement. That is my law clerk inquiring about my whereabouts. I have a courtroom full of individuals awaiting my presence. Stone disregarded his pleas and opened the rear passenger door of the Mercedes, commencing an inspection of the interior. He located Pierce's briefcase on the rear seat, removed it, and placed it on the trunk of the vehicle. Within were case files, legal briefs, court documents, and a laptop. Stone perused the papers as if searching for narcotics or pilfered property, failing to recognize them as precisely what a judge would transport. A customer at the gas station, identified as David Santos, was refueling his truck at an adjacent pump and observed the unfolding interaction with growing unease. He retrieved his mobile device and initiated recording as the scene appeared incongruous. A gentleman in what was clearly formal attire being treated as a suspect at a gas station directly across from the federal courthouse. At 8:27, 3 minutes prior to the scheduled commencement of the hearing, Stone requested additional unit assistance. I require another unit at the Chevron on Market Street. I have a suspicious individual claiming to be a judge, but I suspect he is involved in the stolen Mercedes incident from this morning. Pierce could scarcely believe what he was hearing. The VIN does not match. You have already processed my registration. Everything is lawful. What further evidence do you require? I need to verify that you have not forged these documents and absconded with this identity along with the vehicle. Within the federal courthouse, 3 blocks away, Angela Morrison stood outside Judge Pierce's courtroom, accompanied by a throng of assembled attorneys, plaintiffs, and defendants, all awaiting the commencement of the hearing. She had attempted to contact the judge 5 times without success. She approached the senior counsel representing the plaintiffs and explained that the judge was unexpectedly delayed. The attorney, Rebecca Chen, expressed bewilderment as Judge Pierce was renowned for his punctuality and professionalism. Should we notify courthouse security? This behavior is uncharacteristic of him. A second patrol car arrived at the gas station at 8:31, and Pierce now found himself encircled by 2 officers while a third conducted a search of his vehicle. Stone was meticulously examining Pierce's judicial robes, purportedly seeking concealed pockets or contraband, treating the formal judicial attire as if it might contain illicit substances or weaponry. I am contacting my chambers presently and instructing my clerk to notify your supervisor, Pierce declared, reaching for his phone once more. Stone advanced and grasped Pierce's wrist. I instructed you not to touch your phone. Place your hands behind your back. You are arresting me? For what offense? For obstruction and operation of a suspicious vehicle. We will ascertain your true identity at the station. Pierce felt the chilling embrace of handcuffs around his wrists, cold metal against the fabric of his judicial robes, and the profound impropriety of the situation fully enveloped him. He was a federal judge being apprehended at a gas station for the transgression of being black in an expensive vehicle while attired in the official regalia of his profession. David Santos meticulously captured the entire event on his mobile device. The application of handcuffs, Pierce standing in his judicial robes beside his Mercedes, and the officers treating him as a criminal. He continued recording, cognizant that this was an occurrence that would necessitate visual evidence for many to believe. At 8:34, Rebecca Chen determined she could no longer delay the hearing. She informed Angela that she would procure coffee before the proceeding eventually commenced and exited the courthouse, heading toward the Chevron station on Market Street, her usual morning stop for caffeine. She entered the gas station at 8:37 and observed police vehicles with illuminated lights, officers surrounding an individual, and a gathering of patrons looking on. She was about to drive past when she noticed the man in handcuffs turn slightly, and she immediately recognized his profile. It was Judge Pierce, her judge, the federal judge whose courtroom awaited him 3 blocks away, now in handcuffs at a gas station, surrounded by law enforcement officers who seemingly had no awareness of having just detained a member of the federal judiciary. Rebecca parked her vehicle, exited, her mobile device already in hand, to document the unfolding scene, and approached the officers responsible for a mistake so calamitous it would terminate careers and serve as an illustrative case study on how racial prejudice can obscure reality, even when that reality is demonstrably attired in judicial robes. Rebecca Chen proceeded directly towards the officers, her phone recording and her voice sharp with authority. "I am attorney Rebecca Chen, and I require you to immediately release Judge Pierce from custody. That is a federal judge you have handcuffed." Stone turned toward her, his expression marked by irritation. "Ma'am, kindly step back. This does not concern you." "It absolutely concerns me. I have a hearing scheduled in his courtroom presently at 8:30. That is Judge Reuben Pierce of the U.S. District Court, and you are causing him to miss a federal court proceeding." Stone glanced from Pierce to Rebecca, his initial certainty beginning to falter. "She is also fabricating a story. They are colluding." Rebecca accessed the federal court's official website on her phone and presented the screen to Stone. The display showed Judge Pierce's official biographical page, complete with his photograph, his qualifications, and the date of his appointment. The individual depicted in the photograph was identical to the man standing in handcuffs, attired in judicial robes. "That is his official court page, Judge Reuben Pierce, appointed to the federal bench 22 years ago. Observe his visage. Observe his attire. These are judicial robes, not a costume. You have just arrested a federal judge." Stone's face drained of color as he examined the website, then looked at Pierce and then back at the photograph. The second officer, who had arrived as backup, moved closer and also viewed the screen, his expression clearly conveying an immediate understanding of the situation. "Stone, uncuff him this instant. But the stolen vehicle report, the VIN, does not match. You have already verified that. Uncuff the judge." The handcuffs were removed at 8:41, 11 minutes after Pierce's hearing was supposed to have commenced. Stone's hands trembled as he removed the restraints, and Pierce rubbed his wrist where the metal had left distinct red marks. Rebecca was already on her phone contacting the courthouse. "Angela, I have located Judge Pierce. He is at the Chevron station on Market Street. The police detained him. We are returning now." Pierce adjusted his robes with as much composure as he could muster and looked directly at Stone. "Officer, what is your name and badge number?" "Michael Stone, badge number 4291. "Officer Stone, you detained and apprehended a federal judge for 37 minutes based on nothing more than the fact that I am black and operating a Mercedes. You dismissed my judicial regalia as a mere costume. You steadfastly refused to confirm my identity despite my repeated entreaties, and in doing so, you compelled me to miss a federal court proceeding concerning official misconduct by law enforcement. This, I am certain, will not escape anyone's notice when the full account of this incident becomes public knowledge." Stone began to stammer an explanation, but Pierce raised his hand. "I have no interest in your justifications at this precise moment. My urgent need is to reach my courtroom." Pierce then entered his Mercedes and proceeded the 3 blocks to the courthouse, with Rebecca following in her own vehicle. He parked in the designated judge's garage and traversed the building, still attired in his robes, with the distinct marks of handcuffs plainly visible on his wrists. Court security personnel who observed him performed double takes, recognizing that something was gravely amiss. He entered his courtroom at precisely 8:49 a.m., 19 minutes past the appointed hour, and the assembled gallery, packed to capacity, fell into a profound silence upon his appearance. His robes were creased from the examination he had undergone, his typically composed demeanor was visibly strained, and the crimson indentations on his wrists were apparent to all. Pierce ascended to the bench and surveyed the assembled individuals in the courtroom. "My sincerest apologies for this uncharacteristic delay. I was detained by the Philadelphia Police Department at a service station situated 3 blocks from this very courthouse. I was subjected to a search, placed in handcuffs, and falsely accused of perpetrating the theft of my own vehicle, all because the officer who initiated the stop was incapable of accepting that a black man adorned in judicial robes was, in fact, a federal judge." The silence that descended upon the courtroom was absolute and pervasive. The case involving police misconduct that he was scheduled to preside over centered on allegations of excessive force. And now, the very judge tasked with hearing this case had just experienced a personal encounter with biased law enforcement practices. Later that same morning, when court security retrieved the surveillance footage from the service station and Officer Stone's body camera recording, the evidence presented was utterly damning. The video unequivocally demonstrated Pierce calmly explaining his judicial status, proffering his credentials, and pleading to be permitted to contact the courthouse. It further depicted Stone dismissing all of Pierce's explanations, referring to his robes as a costume, proceeding to search the vehicle despite the absence of any probable cause, and ultimately placing a federal judge in handcuffs while uttering, "We shall ascertain your true identity at the station." Captain Raymond Torres reviewed the obtained footage and subsequently examined Stone's employment record. His file contained 9 prior complaints filed over a period of 8 years, each originating from black individuals driving expensive automobiles and all articulating the identical pattern of behavior that Pierce had just endured. Torres himself had previously approved the dismissal of these complaints, deeming them unsubstantiated. Now he was witnessing his own officer handcuffing a federal judge based upon the very same racial profiling that these complaints had so clearly described. The United States Marshal Service, which provides essential security for federal judges, promptly initiated a thorough investigation, as any form of aggression directed at a judge's person constitutes a federal offense. Concurrently, the Philadelphia Police Department's Internal Affairs Division launched its own parallel inquiry. Furthermore, Judge Pierce formally submitted a complaint that was directly transmitted to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Stone's purported defense was that he was investigating a report of a stolen vehicle and that Pierce bore a resemblance to a vague description provided. However, the body camera footage conclusively showed that Stone had verified the vehicle identification number, confirmed it did not match any stolen vehicle report, had indeed processed Pierce's information, and found it to be clean. Despite this, he had proceeded with both the search and the arrest. The footage further captured him dismissing the judicial robes as a costume and refusing to place a simple telephone call that would have definitively verified Pierce's identity within a mere 30 seconds. Within a span of 1 week, Stone was taken into custody and formally charged with deprivation of civil rights under color of law, false arrest, and official misconduct. Captain Torres faced a suspension for his repeated pattern of dismissing valid profiling complaints. The Philadelphia Police Department, in turn, found itself subject to a federal consent decree mandating rigorous oversight of all traffic stops to meticulously identify patterns of racial profiling that supervisors had demonstrably ignored for years. Michael Stone was terminated from the Philadelphia Police Department within 2 weeks of the incident, his employment ending even before his criminal trial commenced, as the city recognized the indefensibility of retaining him. The body camera footage vividly portraying him handcuffing a federal judge while clad in judicial robes and derisively referring to those robes as a costume was broadcast on every major news channel, rapidly becoming the most unequivocal example of racial profiling that many legal experts had ever witnessed in documented form. The subsequent criminal trial was notably brief, as Stone's defense attorney possessed no viable strategy when the presented evidence included clear video of his client dismissing a federal judge's stated identity, refusing to verify it despite repeated requests, and ultimately arresting him based solely on the combination of his racial background and his vehicle. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before convicting Stone of deprivation of civil rights and false arrest. He was subsequently sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, permanently forfeiting his law enforcement certification. The civil lawsuit initiated by Judge Pierce resulted in a substantial settlement of $4,600,000 awarded by the city of Philadelphia, representing one of the largest settlements ever disbursed for a case of wrongful detention. However, Pierce made it unequivocally clear that the lawsuit was not motivated by financial gain. Instead, it was driven by a profound desire for accountability and to expose a pervasive pattern that the department had deliberately overlooked for an extended period. Captain Raymond Torres experienced a demotion and was ultimately compelled to accept early retirement when the comprehensive investigation revealed his complicity in dismissing 9 separate complaints against Stone over an 8-year span, each detailing the precise same racial profiling that Pierce had encountered. This pattern had been meticulously documented and flagged multiple times by the complainants themselves, yet Torres had consistently endorsed every dismissal, asserting that the stops had adhered to departmental policy guidelines. The Department of Justice's extensive investigation broadened its scope beyond just Stone and Torres, delving into the entirety of the Philadelphia Police Department's traffic stop data. The subsequent analysis starkly revealed systemic racial disparities in terms of who was subjected to stops, the duration of these stops, and the frequency of searches. The ensuing consent decree mandated extensive and comprehensive reforms, including mandatory data collection for all stops, automatic review processes for officers exhibiting statistical bias, civilian oversight for profiling complaints, and the termination of supervisors who improperly dismissed valid complaints without adequate investigation. Nevertheless, the legal victories and the implementation of policy changes did not entirely erase the profound impact of the incident. Judge Pierce returned to the bench and continued to preside over his cases, but the experience irrevocably altered him in ways that no financial settlement could ever mend. He developed a persistent anxiety regarding routine activities such as stopping for gasoline or simply driving, frequently questioning whether another officer would perceive his race before acknowledging his professional standing. The physical marks left by the handcuffs on his wrist faded within days, but the indelible memory of standing at a service station in his judicial robes, being treated as if he were a common car thief, remained with him. The police misconduct case he had been rushing to hear that morning subsequently acquired a profound and personal significance. He now understood on a visceral level what the plaintiffs had so often described when recounting their experiences of being profiled and detained despite having committed no wrongdoing. His subsequent rulings in civil rights cases became deeply informed by his first-hand immersion in how implicit bias can completely supersede compelling evidence and sound reasoning. The case itself evolved into a landmark instance, a subject of study in law schools and police academies across the nation. The imagery of a federal judge, garbed in judicial robes, being handcuffed at a service station became a potent symbol illustrating how racial profiling can become so deeply entrenched that even the most overt indicators of legitimacy, judicial attire, official credentials, and proximity to a courthouse are summarily disregarded when an officer has predetermined that a black individual is out of place in an expensive automobile. Rebecca Chen, the attorney who had recognized Pierce and meticulously documented his release, emerged as a pivotal witness in numerous subsequent investigations. Her impulsive decision to stop for a cup of coffee, coupled with her immediate recognition of her judge, potentially averted Pierce being taken to a police station for processing before the full magnitude of the error could be comprehended. 3 years later, Pierce continued to serve with distinction on the federal bench, leveraging his influential platform to advocate for criminal justice reform and speaking at various conferences about his deeply personal experience. The settlement funds were channeled into legal aid organizations, providing vital assistance to individuals who had endured similar profiling incidents but lacked his resources or public platform to pursue justice. Stone served 18 months of his prison sentence and was subsequently released into a life where he would never again be permitted to work in law enforcement. Torres forfeited his pension benefits and his professional reputation. The Philadelphia Police Department instituted genuine reforms, fostering an environment of accountability for officers who demonstrated patterns of racial bias. However, on those mornings when Pierce would stop for gasoline en route to the courthouse, he would still experience a distinct flutter of apprehension whenever he observed patrol cars. He continued to carry multiple forms of identification, far exceeding what any ordinary individual would deem necessary. He still found himself second-guessing the wisdom of wearing his judicial robes when venturing outside the courthouse, keenly aware that they had been dismissed as a mere costume by an officer who was demonstrably unable to look beyond the color of his skin. The accountability achieved was unprecedented, and the reforms implemented were remarkably comprehensive. Stone was incarcerated, departmental policies were fundamentally altered, and the case became a profound educational moment regarding the severe repercussions of racial profiling. Yet Pierce carried the profound understanding that his 22 years of dedicated service on the federal bench, his distinguished judicial robes, and his close proximity to the very courthouse where he executed his duties had ultimately meant nothing to an officer whose deeply ingrained bias superseded the compelling force of evidence. He had triumphed in every legal contest and facilitated systemic changes that offered protection to countless others from experiencing similar treatment, but the personal cost was enduring and profound. The experience of being handcuffed at a service station just 3 blocks from his own courtroom, of having his profession summarily dismissed as a fabrication and his judicial attire derisively mocked as a costume, of learning that even the esteemed position of a federal judge could not shield him from being perceived as a threat before he was acknowledged as a human being, his judicial robes reduced to mere fabric, a federal judge subjected to handcuffs at a service station, his racial bias so deeply ingrained that it failed to recognize legitimate authority standing directly before it. Share this narrative if you firmly believe that credentials should hold greater significance than one's skin color. Subscribe to JPTV for compelling stories where justice was ultimately served, yet the emotional scars persist. Leave a comment below. How can we effectively prevent bias from eclipsing irrefutable truth? Until our next installment.